everybody. My name is Bob, and we're doing something a little bit different today. Uh, I'm writing a science fiction novella or short story. Yes, it depends on your definition of length there. Um, it's going to be a hard science fiction story, uh, and I take that fairly literally. I mean, hard science fiction meaning I need to know that what I'm doing in the story is possible. No warp drive, no lightsabers, nothing like that. Has to my ideal for writing science fiction is to write science fiction that could actually be something that would reasonably practically happen in the future, or which at least is technically possible. Um, and to do that, I need to look even if well, put it this way. Let me back up a second. There's always a conflict in my science fiction writing between talking about the details of the technology and actually doing something with the characters. Probably, sort of the essence of writing is you need to focus on the characters, not the tech they're using. But at least I need to know that what they're doing is sensible. Which means that in this case, I pretty much have to build the ships they're going to use in my head, and in this case, in 3D modeling software, because I'm going to need to have the 3D models for doing stuff like my cover art, but also I need to know how it's all put together. Um, and so that's what I'm doing here. Is I'm working in a program called Bryce. If you're thinking about doing 3D modeling, Bryce is a fairly affordable and very intuitive software to use. There's two things about Bryce. So it's sort of a good news and bad news. Good news is it's really easy to get started. It's really easy to do things. It's an extremely intuitive software, unlike things like 3D Max and Blender, which are extremely counterintuitive and difficult. The learning curve on learning Blender, which is a free 3D modeling software, the learning curve on that is really, really steep. Really steep. So the good news is if you needed to do some casual 3D modeling, Bryce is the thing to use. If you're really wanting to get into it like as a career or something, probably just need to bite the bullet and learn Blender, or whatever software you think you're going to need to be using in the future. Because Bryce, although it's really easy, really intuitive, fun even, it's not as powerful as a software like Blender. But getting back to the story, I need to build this ship essentially in order to satisfy myself, if nobody else, that the ship itself makes sense, and that it makes sense also in the context of the science fiction environment that it's working in, which in this case is the moon. The Pretty much the entire story takes place. The entire story takes place either on the moon surface or in lunar orbit, and so I need to not only make a rocket ship that makes sense, in other words, it would physically work, but I need to make one that makes sense for the moon. The moon has certain deficits as far as raw materials go. There is water on the South Pole. Probably the water is too valuable a resource to be used for rocket fuel if you have another choice. And in this case, the other choice is a metal hybrid rocket. There are certain metals that are very commonly available on the moon: aluminum, magnesium, and calcium. Calcium actually being a metal, strangely enough, that reacts very strongly with oxygen in terms of burning and rocket fuel. That's actually what solid rockets, generally speaking, solid rockets, generally speaking, use aluminum as a fuel, or at least some of them do. But solid rockets are not throttleable, which, if you're trying to get up and down somewhere on the moon and don't want to have a heart attack, you need a rocket that's throttleable. So this is the model for a metal hybrid rocket. In other words, the fuel is in this area here, the central canister, as it were, um, and it burns, but it's not a situation where you start it and you can't do anything further. It's throttleable because of the levels of oxygen. Liquid oxygen comes into the engine and burns these little rods of metal, and you can lower and increase the level of your oxygen flow, and so throttle the engine. You can shut it off, and then you can turn it back on again. So I need to know how how this spaceship is going to work, and that it's going to work in the sort of resource environment of the moon. And in this case, all the materials it would be made of pretty much should be things that are very commonly available on the moon. Now, uh, people talk very glibly about extracting aluminum and so forth from the moon. Um, that's actually a really major technical issue as far as how you get aluminum out of the moon. However, the minerals are, I mean, the element is certainly there in great abundance. So it's simply a technical matter of how you get the aluminum out of the raw materials on the moon. That's not a trivial matter. That's a very non-trivial matter. However, if there's going to be any colonization of the moon at all, that's going to be something that they're going to have to deal with at some early point in the game. So at this point, I've just simply assumed that they know how to get aluminum out of the moon now, and that's no longer a problem. Now, another, and you think, well, we get aluminum out of the Earth all the time, and that's not a big deal. We have lots of things made out of aluminum. Well, there are geologic processes on the Earth that can tend to concentrate metals so that they are easier to get. The great example is iron. Um, Most of the iron deposits on the Earth that are there in such a concentrated form because the oxygen when life started in the oceans, they started the algae and so forth started pumping out oxygen, which then caused the metals the iron that was actually floating around in that ocean. The oceans of the Earth were actually originally green because of the iron content in them. It caused all the iron to precipitate out of the oceans into large beds, basically, and that's why we have these big beds of iron on the Earth. Um, on the Moon, those geologic processes don't exist, and so we're going to have to find ways once we decide to colonize the Moon, working with the metals in the form that they're presented there. There's actually a lot of work that has to be done on that. If you're thinking about lunar colonization as a thing that we want to do at some point, that's like job one, is figuring out how do we get the metals out of the lunar soil, which are there in quite a lot of abundance, but they aren't concentrated in the form of ores necessarily in the way that is the case on the Earth. So, yeah. But in any case, so I not only have to deal with is the tech physically feasible, scientifically feasible, but also does the tech work for the moon as far as what resources are there? Well, the resources that are used in these rockets, aluminum, magnesium, and calcium, are very abundant on the moon. There is a major technical issue of how you get that out, but we will just simply assume that if there is colonization of the moon at all, that has already been figured out at this point. So this is a hybrid rocket pod. The idea is that there's fuel inside this part, the part that's red here, and that is consumed as the rocket pod is used. And then when that's done with, you simply detach the whole pod, snap in a new one, and go on, because the fuel is actually contained in here. There's fuel rods up here and the combustion chamber down here. So I am building a rocket. This rocket, it's called the Flotsam. It's the spaceship of the lead character in the book. And so I'm in the process of building this rocket, which means I have to build this. One of the first things I have to build is this whole rocket pod assembly. Okay, I have there are two models here because four of the or sorry, altogether eight of the engines will be non-gimbling, and four of them will be have gimbals. So there are two different models here. Let's go ahead and do a quick render. Now, what I don't have is the parts where this attaches to the spacecraft, because those parts haven't been built yet. But I do have the rocket pods, and now we're going to move to the spacecraft itself and build out those parts of it that are going to attach to this, and also all the plumbing and so on. Okay, here's what I've done of the ship so far. Not very much. Basically, just the command pod, as it were. Now, I gave some thought as to what sort of shape I should have. As far as putting stuff in to the cockpit, a square shape has its benefits. The problem with square, perfect square is at the corners you can have stresses build up, and this is a object that would be under pressure. Um, so actually, I mean, in terms of what would be the ideal shape for that, as far as as a pressure vessel, the ideal shape would be a sphere. However, spheres aren't too ideal as far as putting things into them. Most things made by people are sort of oblongish shaped, and so there'd be a fair amount of wasted space if I did go with a spherical vessel. So I went with a square with rounded edges. Should be easy would be easy to fabricate if it were being fabricated in real life. And Also, as you may have noticed with the rockets, I'm trying to go with textures that look a little beat up because this is a used spacecraft, so it shouldn't look brand new. Let's go ahead and stick my rocket engines in here. Now these are not to scale yet; so they were just modeled, and without regard to scale. Now we need to work on the part of the structures that would actually hold all this, these parts to the ship. There'll also be an area underneath the control cabin for attaching a standardized cargo container, sort of like the way that cargo ships on the Earth put things in these oblongish cargo containers. I would assume that in space they would do much the same thing, and so it's going to have some way for slinging these cargo containers underneath it. So all that will have to be worked out. I'll have to put a hatch on the back of this at some point. Anyway, I will get working on that. Okay, I'm doing a texture for the hatch in Photoshop. Um, for this sort of thing, you can use Photoshop or GIMP. If you're brand new to doing image stuff, I would suggest that you try to learn GIMP because GIMP is free and Photoshop costs a lot of money. Just put it in very very plain terms. Photoshop is something that I've used professionally. I've grown used to. I can't imagine not using Photoshop. But if you're new to doing images and stuff, by all means use GIMP because it's free. Now the real secret of this image is in the alpha channel. I've got this is going to actually create texture on the object. So that's going to in Bryce it's going to make it look like it's got depth to it. So I just export that, and we'll bring it into Bryce. Okay, I got the hatch put in. I did not go into a great deal of detail with it, but it is in. Now you may want to you may be asking yourself, why is Bob putting a back door in this thing at all, seeing as how the part you're actually going to see is most likely going to be the front. That's because you never know how you're going to use a model or reuse a model or reuse parts of a model. So I always model the whole thing, so that whatever angle I want to look at it at, I can do that. So now I've got to start building the structure that gets attached to this that'll hold on the rockets. I have to wonder to myself why I put in levels of detail on this model that no one will ever really notice. I guess part of the answer is I want it to be want the model to be as realistic as I possibly can be, even if nobody would notice, and even if no one knows what all these thingamajigs do. I suppose in a way that's almost part of the reason why I write science fiction is because I want to realize these things as completely in thought as I reasonably can, uh, and um, and so I am obsessing about details that probably nobody really ever noticed. I don't think that whether I left little bolt tops off top of that thing, uh, but also in a way um, it does affect the total look. I mean, people may not understand what the function of the detail is, but they know that it's there. I mean, they can see, oh, that's a very that looks real. Put it that way. Yeah, it looks real. So that's sort of what I'm aiming at is I want it to look like it's a real, practical, honest to God spaceship, not a fantasy Star Wars, Star Trek spaceship. Something that looks like you could take that thing onto the lunar surface and fly some bitch. So I guess that's sort of what I'm aiming at. I don't know if you can hear this or not. Anyway, it was one of my favorite songs from Grand Theft Auto, so that I would play it while I'm rendering this. Oh, ouch. Okay. Okay, doing those attachments for the gimbals, for the gimbal engines on the sides here. It was kind of a pain in the butt. Unfortunately, I had to go with shiny oxygen tanks because I have realized, okay, so I've got an opaque green oxygen tank, and about noon, high noon at the moon, on the moon, what is that going to do to the oxygen inside of it? It's going to boil it. So I had to make the uh, oxygen tanks shiny green instead of just opaque, kind of grungy looking green. Um, and that could be too much oxygen for this number of engines, but probably not. I don't think so. No. Besides, you got to breathe oxygen too, right? Um, okay, so next up, there's two things. The first thing is the building the cargo container, which right over here you can see that's just a gray block. So that's just a sit-in for the cargo container. I got to put landing legs on this thing, and I got to put in hookups or lines for the liquid oxygen and the hydraulics. So we still got a ways to go. It's sort of coming together. We still got a ways to go. It's not quite as grungy looking as I was hoping for, but I can grunge it up a little bit in Photoshop once I render it. Okay, I put in RCS and fuel lines, and the RCS, since monopropellant would have to be imported from Earth, I have these using, or I visualize these using hydrogen peroxide instead. Probably not as reliable, but it's something that you could actually get on the moon. So there's that. I've got the fuel lines, got the lines for the hydrogen peroxide. Still need. I've got landing legs. I'll still need. Now with landing legs, I was tempted to go with even simpler landing legs than this, but I gave it some thought as far as why why landing legs on almost every probe you see, or on the landers too, the on the limb and all that, are this shape. Seems like there's probably a pretty good reason for it, so I went ahead and went with that. Now the what's left to do is hydraulics lines, and there's an awful lot of hydraulics involved here. So there's going to be a lot of hydraulics lines. I'm probably going to make those all go to this silvery thing over here. That's sort of my central clearinghouse for porting things to other things. So I'll probably make those go over there. Excuse me. Um, so there's hydraulics, and pretty much that's it. Okay, I decided that since all the hydraulics had access to some part of the fuselage, I just assumed that the hydraulics are going to be run through through cavities in the fuselage, so I don't have to engage in the nightmare of trying to run hydraulics everywhere to where they belong. Um, Now I started out with when I'm working on the cargo container. I started out with a cargo container was the same dimensions approximately as a shipping container on nowadays, like for actual ships. That was too weird looking, so I went with one that's smaller. Uh, and it's got some advertising on the side, as you'll see. The advertising on this side is algae yum. Mmm, algae yum. Delicious algae. Mmm. Which probably, as terms of a food to be eating in space, considering that it can also scrub CO2, it's a probably will the if there's any we have any future descendants that actually go into space and live there, they're going to be eating a lot of algae. I'd be willing to bet. And on the other side, some of you who played the this particular game may notice know this one from Fallout. Nuka Cola. Sadly, none of this advertising will be able to be seen when it's actually loaded on the ship. But it's there, yeah. Okay, well you know pretty much what that looks like. Um, let's get it attached to the ship. I'm going to assume that cargo containers in the future have just sort of uh, generic connection points to where you can hook them up to your fuselage in some way. So I'm not going to worry that much about how that actually fits in there. Just assume that there's a quick connect of some kind or multiple quick connects that hook up to the fuselage in some fashion. Yeah, we'll do a render of the whole effect here. And when I use this to create the cover art for my little novella or short story, whatever it winds up being, of course I'm going to have this landing on the moon and so on in a more dynamic environment than simply a black background. I use the same texture for the hatch on the cargo container. I figure, what the hell? If there's any picture that sees one of them, we won't see the other one. So, okay, well that's it. That's the Flotsam, which is the cargo ship, which is operated by the main character in the novella, short story, whatever it happens to be. Uh, and that's how I made it. Alrighty.